Some scars are hidden for a reason, and sometimes the wrong person notices them at exactly the right moment. The sound that cut through the downtown Seattle cafe wasn't a shout. It wasn't a dropped coffee cup or a chair scraping across the polished hardwood floor. It was the sharp, stunned silence that followed an impulsive mistake. Every conversation faded. Every pair of eyes turned toward the same corner near the front windows where morning sunlight spilled across white marble tables and steaming ceramic mugs. Marcus Bennett stood perfectly still, one hand gently resting on the shoulder of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Fresh coffee stained the sleeve of his faded navy jacket, and the surprise in his eyes lasted only a heartbeat before it disappeared behind quiet self-control. Across from him stood Victoria Ashford, the white CEO of Ashford Biomedical, one of the fastest-growing medical technology companies in the country. Her tailored ivory suit was marked by a splash of espresso, and frustration clouded every decision she made in that moment. She had walked into the cafe already carrying the weight of a billion-dollar acquisition, 3 hours of sleep, and a calendar packed so tightly that even 5 extra minutes felt expensive. When she felt the warm coffee touch her jacket, she reacted before thinking. Now the entire cafe watched as she stared at Marcus with the certainty that she had been wronged. Lily tightened her grip around her father's hand, her small fingers trembling. She looked up at him with frightened eyes, waiting for him to say something, to defend himself, to argue, to explain that another customer had accidentally bumped into him just seconds earlier. Instead, Marcus simply lowered himself to one knee so he could meet his daughter's eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. "Accidents happen." His calm voice seemed almost impossible inside a room filled with tension. Victoria frowned. She had expected excuses, maybe anger, maybe a scene that justified her irritation. Instead, she found herself facing a man who refused to answer humiliation with humiliation. That only confused her more. "Security," she said firmly, looking toward the cafe manager. "Please remove them. I don't want any more trouble this morning." A quiet murmur rolled across nearby tables. Some customers looked uncomfortable. Others simply looked away, unwilling to become involved. Marcus slowly stood, adjusted the worn backpack hanging from one shoulder, then reached down to pick up Lily's little pink lunchbox that had slipped onto the floor during the commotion. "Come on, kiddo," he whispered with a gentle smile that somehow remained genuine. "You're going to be late for school." Lily nodded, although tears shimmered in her eyes. She didn't understand why grown-ups could be so quick to judge someone they had never met. Neither of them noticed the tall man standing several feet behind Victoria. Ethan Brooks had spent nearly 20 years protecting executives, diplomats, and public officials. Very little surprised him anymore. His posture was steady, his expression disciplined, and his attention rarely drifted. But as Marcus bent to retrieve the lunchbox, sunlight caught the back of his neck. Just above the collar sat a long, faded scar running behind his left ear. Ethan's breathing stopped for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. Something deep inside his memory stirred, pulling him backward through years he had spent trying not to revisit. Marcus straightened, completely unaware that the quiet bodyguard was no longer looking at the coffee on the floor. He was staring at the scar. And for the first time that morning, someone in the cafe looked at Marcus Bennett not with judgment, but with recognition. Marcus guided Lily toward the cafe door at the same unhurried pace he used every morning, as though protecting her peace mattered far more than protecting his pride. Outside, rain clouds drifted slowly across the Seattle skyline, softening the sunlight until everything beyond the windows looked painted in silver and gray. Lily looked up at her father, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Dad, did we do something wrong?" Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that carried both warmth and exhaustion. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people are carrying storms that have nothing to do with us." She searched his face, trying to understand words that sounded much older than her 8 years. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper napkin from breakfast. He carefully wiped a tiny coffee stain from her pink sweater before brushing a loose curl away from her forehead. "Remember what Mom used to tell us?" he asked. Lily nodded slowly. "Kind people do not stop being kind because someone else forgets how." Marcus chuckled softly. Exactly. Those words had become the foundation of their little family after his wife, Grace, passed away 4 years earlier following a long illness. Since then, Every morning had followed nearly the same rhythm. Marcus packed Lily's lunch before sunrise, drove her to school whenever he could, worked long shifts maintaining electrical systems at Seattle General Hospital, and spent every evening helping with homework before reading one chapter from whatever library book Lily had borrowed that week. Money was tight. His pickup truck had more than 200,000 miles on the odometer. The apartment they rented overlooked an aging parking garage instead of the waterfront. Yet Lily never felt poor because Marcus filled their home with patience instead of possessions. Inside the cafe, Victoria remained standing near the counter, but the confidence she normally carried into every boardroom had begun to crack. She noticed several customers quietly returning to their conversations, though not with admiration. Some avoided looking at her altogether. Others glanced in her direction with expressions she rarely experienced. Disappointment. The feeling unsettled her far more than criticism from shareholders ever had. She reached for another napkin and looked down at the faint coffee stain still visible on her sleeve. Suddenly, it seemed insignificant compared to the silence hanging over the room. Across the cafe, Ethan Brooks had not moved. His attention remained fixed on the glass entrance where Marcus and Lily were about to disappear into the cool morning air. The scar. He knew he had seen it before. Not in this city. Not in any executive protection briefing. Somewhere much farther away. Somewhere louder. His fingers unconsciously curled into a loose fist before relaxing again. Images flickered at the edge of memory like an old film reel refusing to focus. Desert heat shimmering above broken pavement. Smoke climbing into an endless sky. A voice shouting through dust. A strong hand pulling him forward when his own legs could barely move. Ethan closed his eyes for one brief second, hoping the fragments would settle into something clear. When he opened them again, Marcus was reaching for the cafe door with Lily beside him, still speaking to her in that same calm voice. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Every instinct developed over 2 decades of military service and executive protection suddenly told him one thing. He had met this man before. And if his memory was right, everyone in this cafe, especially the woman he had sworn to protect, had completely misunderstood who Marcus Bennett really was. The cafe door swung open, letting in a cool breeze scented with rain and wet pavement, but Ethan Brooks barely noticed. Marcus and Lily had already stepped onto the sidewalk, disappearing into the morning crowd that flowed between office towers and city buses. For a brief moment, Ethan remained frozen, his disciplined mind wrestling with memories that refused to stay buried. Then another image surfaced with startling clarity. A desert sunrise painted in pale orange. The distant echo of helicopters. A convoy stalled beside a damaged road where everything had changed in less than a minute. Ethan blinked hard, forcing himself back into the present, but the memory only sharpened. He remembered lying on the ground, unable to find his footing, surrounded by smoke so thick it swallowed every landmark. He remembered believing that nobody could possibly reach him in time. Then someone had appeared through the haze. A broad-shouldered soldier whose calm voice had somehow cut through every sound around him. "Stay with me," the stranger had said. "You are going home." Ethan had never forgotten those words. He had tried for years to remember the man's face, but memory had faded around everything except one unmistakable detail. The long scar behind his left ear. Back inside the cafe, Victoria adjusted the cuff of her expensive jacket and picked up her phone. Her schedule waited for no one. A board meeting in 45 minutes. Investors flying in from New York before lunch. Television interviews before sunset. Every minute already belonged to someone else. Yet something felt different. She looked toward the front windows where Marcus and Lily had disappeared. The little girl had never cried out. The father had never raised his voice. They had simply left with quiet dignity, carrying nothing except a worn backpack and a lunchbox decorated with tiny painted butterflies. Victoria frowned. She had spent years believing confidence meant always being the strongest person in the room. Yet somehow the quiet man she had dismissed seemed stronger than anyone she had met that morning. "We should go," she said, slipping her phone into her handbag. Ethan did not answer. "Ethan," she repeated. He slowly turned toward her, his usually composed face carrying an expression she had never seen before. It was not fear. It was disbelief. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I think I know that man." Victoria paused. "From where?" Ethan shook his head as though trying to unlock a door inside his own mind. I am not completely certain yet. His voice remained controlled, but his eyes never left the cafe entrance. If I am right, this is not a coincidence. Victoria studied him carefully. Ethan Brooks was not a man who made emotional assumptions. During the 5 years he had worked as her head of security, he had built his reputation on facts, patience, and precision. If he sounded uncertain now, it meant something extraordinary had unsettled him. Outside, Marcus lifted Lily into the passenger seat of his aging pickup truck before fastening her seat belt with the same gentle care he had shown every single day since she was old enough to ride beside him. As he closed the truck door, he turned his head just enough for the morning light to strike the scar again. Ethan inhaled sharply. This time there was no doubt. The scar, the voice, the calm, the impossible courage. Every missing piece locked together at once, and the truth he had searched for over 15 years finally stood less than 50 feet away, preparing to drive out of his life for a second time. Marcus slid into the driver's seat, started the aging pickup, and rested both hands on the steering wheel for a moment before turning the key all the way. The engine rumbled to life with the familiar sound of a truck that had earned every mile it carried. Beside him, Lily quietly buckled the last clip of her backpack and looked out the rain-speckled windshield. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Are you sad?" Marcus smiled without taking his eyes off the road ahead. "No, sweetheart. I just hope she finds a better morning tomorrow." Lily tilted her head. "After what happened?" Marcus nodded. People who carry heavy burdens sometimes forget to see the people standing in front of them. Lily thought about that as she hugged her lunchbox against her chest. She had expected her father to be angry. Instead, he sounded concerned for someone who had shown him very little kindness. The truck eased away from the curb just as Ethan Brooks stepped outside the cafe. The cool Seattle air brushed across his face, but his pulse was racing far faster than it had during any executive security assignment. He watched the pickup merge into slow morning traffic. Every instinct told him not to let it disappear. "Wait," he whispered almost to himself. Victoria exited the cafe moments later, adjusting the strap of her handbag while checking the flood of messages lighting up her phone. She noticed Ethan standing perfectly still on the sidewalk instead of opening the waiting black SUV. "We are already behind schedule," she said. Ethan did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the pickup several car lengths away. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "please give me 1 minute." Victoria lowered her phone. During 5 years together, Ethan had never once asked her to delay a meeting without a security reason. His calm professionalism had always been absolute. The seriousness in his voice immediately caught her attention. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan took a slow breath. 15 years ago, before I entered executive protection, I served overseas with the Army." Victoria nodded quietly. She knew very little about his military career because Ethan rarely discussed it. "There was a rescue operation," he continued. "Our convoy never reached its destination the way it was supposed to. Everything changed in a matter of moments." His eyes drifted back toward Marcus's truck. "I would not be standing here today if one soldier had not refused to leave me behind." Victoria listened without interrupting. Ethan's voice remained steady, but something deeply personal had entered it. "I never learned where he went afterward," Ethan said. "The paperwork was incomplete. We were transferred to different units. I searched for him after I came home, but every lead disappeared." Victoria looked toward the pickup, now waiting at a red light half a block away. "And you believe that man is him?" Ethan answered without hesitation this time. "I believe he is the reason I lived long enough to build the life I have now." The traffic signal remained red. Sunlight briefly broke through the clouds, reflecting across the truck's rear window like a flash from another lifetime. Marcus adjusted his mirror before smiling at Lily as she pointed excitedly toward a rainbow beginning to form above the distant waterfront. He had no idea that only yards away, someone had finally recognized the sacrifice he had never spoken about, and someone else was about to discover that the quiet father she had judged carried a history far greater than she could possibly imagine. The traffic light remained red, holding Marcus's pickup in place for just a few more precious seconds. While inside Ethan Brooks, it felt as though 15 years had vanished in an instant. He could almost smell the dry desert air again, hear the distant rumble of engines, and remember the impossible calm of one soldier whose voice never wavered when everyone else had begun to panic. Marcus Bennett had never been the loudest man in the unit. He had not been the one telling stories around camp or competing for attention. He was the man who checked on everyone before checking on himself. The one who carried extra water because someone else always forgot theirs. The one who somehow found a reason to smile even after the longest day. Ethan remembered sitting beside him one evening beneath a sky filled with more stars than he had ever seen back home. Marcus had taken a worn photograph from his wallet and smiled at the picture of a young woman named Grace. One day, he had said, "I just want to go home, marry her, and be the kind of father my kids will always remember." Ethan had laughed back then, telling Marcus that he sounded more like a schoolteacher than a soldier. Marcus had simply shrugged. "Uniforms come off eventually," he had replied. "Character stays." Those words had followed Ethan through every chapter of his life, even after the face behind them slowly faded from memory. Now that face had returned, older, more tired, carrying the quiet weight of years, but the same kindness still lived inside his eyes. Ethan looked toward Victoria, who had remained unusually silent throughout his story. For the first time since joining her company, she was not thinking about stock prices, investors, or contracts. She was thinking about the little girl who had looked frightened yet still trusted her father enough to smile when he reassured her. She was thinking about the man who could have defended himself inside the cafe, but had chosen instead to comfort his daughter. "Why would someone like that never tell anyone?" she asked softly. Ethan answered without taking his eyes off the truck. "Because men like Marcus never did good things to be recognized. They did them because they believed it was the right thing to do." The light changed to green. Marcus's pickup rolled forward, blending into the stream of morning traffic crossing the intersection. Ethan took one step toward the waiting sport utility vehicle before stopping again. Something else surfaced in his memory, something he had nearly forgotten. Weeks after returning home, he had tried to locate Marcus through military records. Every request ended the same way. Transferred. Medical leave. Honorably discharged. No forwarding address. No public interviews. No medals displayed in newspapers. It was as though Marcus had quietly stepped away from every opportunity to be celebrated. Victoria slowly lowered her phone. The dozens of unread messages suddenly seemed meaningless. She watched the old pickup grow smaller in the distance until it almost disappeared beyond the next block. A strange feeling settled over her, heavier than embarrassment and deeper than regret. She had built an entire career believing that success revealed a person's worth. Yet this morning, she had met someone whose greatest achievements were completely invisible, hidden beneath a faded jacket, an old pickup truck, and a life devoted to raising one little girl. Neither she nor Ethan realized that before the day was over, the truth behind Marcus Bennett's past would not only change how they saw him, but would also force Victoria to confront the one thing no amount of power or wealth had ever taught her: the difference between authority and true character. Marcus turned into the parking lot of Lily's elementary school just as the morning bell echoed across the campus. The rain had stopped completely, leaving tiny drops sparkling on the maple trees that lined the sidewalk. Lily gathered her backpack, then paused before opening the passenger door. "Dad?" she said quietly. Marcus looked at her with the same patient expression he had worn every morning for years. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting in her heart since they left the cafe. Will that lady ever know she was wrong? Marcus rested one hand gently over hers. "Maybe," he answered. "Maybe not. We cannot choose when people understand us. We can only choose who we are while they are figuring it out." Lily smiled faintly and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I love you, Dad." Marcus hugged her back. "I love you more than every star in the sky." She laughed. "That is impossible." "You are right," he said with a grin. "It is even more than that." As Lily skipped toward the school entrance, Marcus waited until she disappeared safely inside before pulling away from the curb. His next stop was Seattle General Hospital, where another full day of repairing electrical systems waited for him. It was work that rarely earned praise. Most people never noticed him unless something stopped working. Marcus preferred it that way. Quiet work, honest work, work that helped people without asking for recognition. Across downtown, Victoria sat in the back seat of her company vehicle, but she had not answered a single email since leaving the cafe. The city moved past her window in a blur of glass buildings, coffee shops, bicycles, and pedestrians hurrying through another busy weekday. Normally, she would have been reviewing presentations or rehearsing talking points before facing investors. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to one image. A little girl looking at her father after an uncomfortable moment and watching him respond with gentleness instead of bitterness. Victoria finally broke the silence. "Ethan." "Yes, ma'am." "Have you ever regretted judging someone too quickly?" Ethan looked out the windshield before answering. "Every good soldier learns that lesson eventually." Victoria nodded slowly. "I thought I could read people within seconds." Ethan gave a quiet smile. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never feel the need to prove it." Those words lingered inside the vehicle long after neither of them spoke again. Meanwhile, Marcus arrived at the hospital and greeted the front desk volunteer by name before carrying his worn toolbox toward the maintenance department. Nurses waved as they passed him in the hallway. Doctors smiled and thanked him for fixing an operating room light the previous evening. A young patient sitting near the pediatric wing lifted a hand and called, "Good morning, Mr. Marcus." Marcus stopped immediately, crouched beside the little boy, and asked how physical therapy had gone the day before. They spoke for less than a minute, but when Marcus continued down the hallway, the child's worried face had transformed into a hopeful smile. From a distance, the hospital's chief administrator happened to witness the entire exchange. She watched Marcus disappear around the corner before quietly saying to herself, "That man never walks past anyone who needs encouragement." At almost the exact same moment across the city, Ethan opened an old military database on his secure tablet. For years it had contained nothing more than unanswered questions. Today, for the first time, he believed it might finally reveal the full story of the man whose quiet courage had already changed far more lives than anyone realized. The secure military archive loaded one record after another until Ethan Brooks suddenly stopped scrolling. His breathing slowed as a faded personnel photograph appeared on the screen. The younger face was unmistakable. Marcus Bennett, Staff Sergeant, honorably discharged. Ethan leaned closer, hardly believing what he was seeing. Beneath the photograph sat a commendation summary that had remained classified for years before eventually being archived. It described a rescue carried out under extraordinary circumstances, but what caught Ethan's attention was the final paragraph. Staff Sergeant Bennett declined public recognition following the mission and requested immediate separation from active duty due to urgent family circumstances. Ethan stared at the sentence for several seconds. He remembered asking countless people where Marcus had gone after they returned home. Nobody had ever known. The answer had been sitting quietly inside an overlooked file all along. At Ashford Biomedical Headquarters, Victoria entered the executive boardroom surrounded by directors, legal advisors, and investors. The polished walnut table reflected the morning sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Normally, the room energized her. Today it felt strangely hollow. As the chief financial officer began presenting quarterly projections, Victoria found herself barely listening. Her thoughts drifted back to the father whose first instinct had been to comfort his daughter instead of defending himself. Across the city, Marcus finished replacing a faulty electrical panel in one of the hospital's older wings. He carefully logged the repair before gathering his tools. A young nurse approached with 2 cups of coffee. "One of these is for you," she said with a grateful smile. "You stayed late yesterday, so our neonatal unit never lost power during the storm." Marcus accepted the cup with quiet appreciation. "I was only doing my job." The nurse laughed gently. "You always say that." Marcus smiled. "Because it is true." Before walking away, he noticed an elderly visitor struggling to read the hospital directory. Without hesitation, he set down his toolbox, walked over, and patiently guided the man toward the correct elevator, never mentioning that he was already behind schedule himself. Kindness seemed as natural to Marcus as breathing. He never calculated whether anyone was watching. Back inside the boardroom, Victoria's assistant quietly entered and placed a tablet beside her. "This came from Mr. Brooks," she whispered. Victoria glanced down at the screen. The first thing she saw was an old military photograph. The second was Marcus's name. The third was a line that made her hands go completely still. Recipient declined formal recognition following life-saving actions performed during active service. Victoria read the sentence again. Then again. Around her, executives continued discussing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, completely unaware that their chief executive officer had stopped hearing every word. She looked toward Ethan, who stood quietly near the conference room entrance. He gave one small nod. No exaggeration, no emotion, just certainty. During the lunch recess, Victoria walked into her private office carrying the tablet. She closed the door, sat alone beside the wide windows overlooking the city, and opened the file from the beginning. Every page revealed another piece of the man she had judged in less than a minute. Decorated veteran, dedicated father, hospital maintenance specialist, volunteer youth mentor, community blood donor. Not one interview, not one public speech, not one attempt to build a reputation from any of it. Victoria slowly lowered the tablet onto her desk. For the first time in many years, she realized that the most remarkable person she had encountered all week had been someone she almost never bothered to truly see. Victoria canceled her afternoon appointments for the first time in nearly 3 years. Her executive assistant stared in surprise as one meeting after another disappeared from the calendar, replaced by a single handwritten note on her tablet. Seattle General Hospital. Ethan Brooks quietly picked up the car keys without asking a single question. He already knew where they were going. During the drive, neither of them spoke much. Rain washed gently across the windshield, while downtown traffic crawled through the afternoon streets. Victoria watched people crossing intersections with umbrellas, parents holding children's hands, nurses carrying coffee, construction workers laughing outside food trucks. For the first time in a very long while, she noticed the ordinary kindness happening all around her. It had always been there. She had simply been moving too fast to see it. At the hospital, Marcus was replacing ceiling lights in a rehabilitation hallway when his supervisor thanked him for covering another employee's evening shift. Marcus smiled. His son has a school concert tonight. Mine does not. He should be there. The supervisor shook his head with admiration. You never stop helping people, do you? Marcus adjusted the last light fixture before climbing down the ladder. Someone helped me once, he answered. I am just passing it forward. Those simple words stayed in the hallway long after he carried his toolbox toward the next work order. Victoria and Ethan entered the hospital lobby only minutes later. The bright afternoon sun streamed through the glass entrance, reflecting across polished floors where volunteers guided visitors and children quietly colored in the waiting area. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Ethan approached the information desk and politely asked whether Marcus Bennett was working that day. The volunteer smiled immediately. Mr. Bennett? Everyone knows Marcus. You will probably find him helping somebody before you find him fixing anything. She pointed toward the rehabilitation wing. As they walked through the hallway, Victoria noticed something unexpected. Every few steps someone greeted Marcus by name. A doctor thanked him for repairing equipment during the storm. A nurse waved with genuine affection. A patient in a wheelchair smiled broadly and called out, "See you tomorrow, Marcus." He answered every greeting with the same warmth, never rushing, never pretending to be too busy. Then Victoria finally saw him. Marcus was kneeling beside an elderly woman whose walker had become tangled in the wheels of a nearby chair. He patiently adjusted the brakes, made certain she felt steady, then carried her small tote bag all the way to the elevator before wishing her a peaceful afternoon. There were no cameras, no applause, no audience seeking inspiration. Just one quiet act of kindness after another, offered as naturally as breathing. Victoria stopped walking. Her eyes filled with a mixture of humility and regret she had never experienced inside any boardroom. Ethan looked at her, but said nothing. He understood that some lessons could not be explained. They had to be witnessed. Marcus finally turned around and noticed the two familiar faces standing at the far end of the corridor. His expression did not harden. There was no resentment in his eyes. Only quiet surprise and the same calm dignity he had carried all morning. Victoria took one careful step forward, her confidence replaced by something far more difficult. Vulnerability. She knew that no title, no fortune, and no authority could undo a single careless moment. The only thing left was the truth, and she hoped with all her heart that the man standing before her would allow her the chance to speak it. Marcus set his toolbox beside the wall and walked toward Victoria with the same calm expression he had carried through every difficult moment that day. The hallway seemed to grow quieter as nurses and visitors instinctively slowed their pace, sensing that something important was unfolding. Victoria stopped a few feet away, her hands folded in front of her, no longer looking like one of the most powerful executives in the city. She simply looked like someone carrying the weight of a mistake. "Mr. Bennett," she began softly, "before I say anything else, I owe you an apology." Marcus listened without interrupting. "This morning I judged you without knowing you. I allowed stress, assumptions, and pride to speak before kindness did. There is no excuse for that, and I am deeply sorry." The words hung in the quiet hallway. Ethan then stepped forward, his posture perfectly straight. Without hesitation, he raised his hand in a crisp military salute. Marcus's eyes widened with surprise. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Bennett," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I searched for you for 15 years. I never had the chance to thank you for bringing me home." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus smiled, the same gentle smile that had comforted Lily only hours before. "I'm just glad you made it home," he replied. Ethan slowly lowered his salute, his eyes shining with emotion. "Everything I have today exists because you refused to leave me behind." Marcus shook his head. "You would have done the same for me." Ethan smiled quietly. "I hope I would have." Victoria looked from one man to the other, realizing that the strongest person in the hallway was the one who had never asked anyone to recognize his strength. "I also read your service record," she admitted. "You never accepted public recognition. You never told anyone what you had done." Marcus glanced toward the hospital window where late afternoon sunlight warmed the polished floor. "My daughter needed a father more than the world needed another hero story," he answered. "When Grace became sick, my place was with my family." Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment before looking back at him. "You taught me something today that no business school ever could." Marcus gave a small smile. "Life teaches all of us eventually." Just then, laughter echoed from the entrance as Lily hurried down the hallway after finishing her after-school reading program. She ran straight toward her father, wrapping her arms around him. "Dad, my teacher said I read the best chapter today." Marcus knelt to her height, smiling with unmistakable pride. "I knew you would." Lily noticed Victoria standing nearby. For a brief second, the hallway became completely still. Then Lily offered a warm smile that carried no bitterness at all. Victoria felt tears gather in her eyes. The child had chosen kindness just as her father had. Weeks later, a quiet plaque appeared in the hospital's family waiting area, donated anonymously by Ashford Biomedical. It read, "Character is revealed not by power, but by the kindness we choose when no one is watching." Marcus never asked who placed it there, and Victoria never told anyone. Every morning, Marcus still drove his old pickup to work. Every afternoon, he still picked Lily up from school. Ethan occasionally stopped by the hospital just to shake his old friend's hand. And whenever sunlight streamed through the hospital windows onto those polished floors, it seemed to remind everyone who passed that true strength never needed to announce itself. It simply showed up, chose compassion, and quietly changed the lives around it.